Welcome friends to another r/malicious compliance video. Here on the Storytime channel, we would never demand compliance, but we would ask if you could hit the like and subscribe buttons down below. That said, our first story of the day is by NoCheetah1486, How I Made My Neighbor and My Landlord Pay the Ultimate Price. First of all, before I start, I'm about 80% sure these two are involved with each other in a romantic way, but I can't confirm. So I travel a lot and I live in an RV mostly full-time. I've stayed at the same park, however, for the last 9 months. I've had issues there. They've called the police on me for arguing, not joking. They'll ignore me in the office, all because there's a small mistake on the paperwork when I stayed here on an overnight 9 months ago. Something happened and they tried to use that to kick me out. However, the owner said it didn't matter and all info was pulled from the registration, so blaming the paperwork for being off by 1 year on the RV as a cause for eviction was far-fetched. There were a few other incidents, but I just figured it's cheap here and I can pay my rent over the phone. Who cares? And don't really plan on going anywhere, as where I am, all the parks are full for snowbird season, plus I got a new job here. Anyways, we had a neighbor who was miserable. We could tell from day one. We also have 2 cats. They hang out on our porch mostly all the time. Occasionally they stray, but they're older and don't go far. So around 6 weeks ago, after 9 months of being my neighbor and never saying a word, he started acting very erratic. Randomly approached my wife as she was washing the car outside and got in her face and started screaming, saying that he dug cat poop out of the dirt behind his 1979 bus on bricks, and now he's going to put traps out and poison. Somehow management had heard the commotion, or he had told them to come, but they pulled up and quickly pulled him to the side to talk to him privately, refusing to even listen to us. We were very weirded out, calling baby, sweetheart, etc. So they said, it's his space, he can trap all he wants. If your animals are going onto his property, then that's your fault. Now, this park is known to have so many cats, they keep feeders by the front office. I warned them what they were doing was illegal, but they said, we've been doing this a long time. We know exactly what we're doing. Call animal control if you don't believe me. I said, okay, but he threatened to poison them, so I'm making a police report in case anything happens. I want him to be on record as having threatened them. They came and took the report, and oh man, did that make him mad. Still, at this point, I hadn't figured out how to get my revenge. Animal control said it was legal and didn't do anything. We immediately got the cats microchipped and went to Lowe's to buy cat traps to teach our cats what a trap is and how to not go into one. Easiest trick I've ever taught an animal. Took 1 try, now they're terrified of anything resembling a trap. We were stumped. The cats were going stir crazy. Then 5 days later, she leaves a letter on my door, a self-help eviction saying I have no choice but to leave immediately and she was turning off the power on X day. I told her if she did, I would call the local police, as that's a self-help eviction, and you've already demonstrated malice by calling the police on me for asking you a question you didn't like, as well as assisting in the trapping of my cats while encouraging other cats to stay, self-help evicting, and at one point she refused my CDC declaration letter, and I have all of these things recorded on video. On top of all this, he says he needs to start his Harley and let it run for 45 minutes to warm up 2 feet from my bedroom window when he knows I work nights and I'm asleep, essentially trying to force me out. Saying my dummy camera isn't allowed, however his real camera pointed at my space is. I was very prepared for an eviction threat as these guys get away with so much, being that they can threaten eviction and people just roll out in their RVs. Not me. No, not me. After the manager finally spoke to the owner, she realized she had dug herself into a hole and now couldn't evict me unless I had not paid rent, as they had refused to show me a contract or any rules the entire time I've been here. They don't like to have written rules so they can change them as they need. The manager told me I was never allowed into the office unless to get mail and I must pay rent over the phone with a card. Still though, I wasn't comfortable because my neighbor had now put out around 4 different traps, some as close as 1 foot from my property line. He still hadn't caught anything, so by chance I ran into a property manager while out shopping for my own trap and he told me some interesting things. I did a little research and found out that trapping in Nevada is illegal without a permit to many protected species. So I knew the cats would never go into a trap. We did about 5 sessions with them, and they got to the point that when they even saw the trap, they'd just hide. So I told the landlord, it's fine, he can keep the traps. I had heard from a neighbor that he saw the manager opening up the storage room and loading his truck with animal traps, but he didn't know about our situation, so he was confused. This is when I put my plan together. I knew the longer he saw he wasn't getting his way, the more traps he would put out, and the more erratic he would become. He started revving his Harley for 45 minutes about 3 times a day while sitting inside with the radio on blasting. Then he'd get a chop saw and cut lumber into as small of pieces as he could, and then stand 10 feet back and launch them into a steel trailer. I had about 2 gigabytes of videos from my cell phone, so I only actually caught about half of it. I knew he was losing it. I put a dummy camera facing his front door, and that's what did it. He got too close and pushed my wife on camera. I had successfully driven him nuts and had what I needed for a civil harassment suit. And I just let him stew. Every few days I'd notice a new trap. Finally, when he got up to 14 traps, his tiny RV space looked like a landmine of cat traps. My cats were and probably are still traumatized from the sight. My next move was to call the Nevada Fish and Wildlife. I emailed them the picture of the traps. They finally showed up today and found his 14 traps. The fine is $1,000 per trap. These people are also cops that don't get to ever bust anyone, so they took it very seriously. They confiscated his traps and hit that park with $14,000 in fines. Afterwards, she called asking me why I would do that. I informed her I'm not done and that I'm building a case on her and her little friend for harassment. I've since been moved to one of the best spots on the property, near the $1 million RVs, next to the pool and hot tub, with a bar and a pizza place about a 200-foot walk away. And yes, I begged for a new spot to end this from day one, but she said, we're booked up full all winter. We won't have even one spot until after Christmas. Well, what do you know? All it takes is building a very serious legal case against somebody to make them cave and give you everything you wanted. If you were in an OP situation, would you accept an upgrade to the most lavish lifestyle in that area in exchange for not prosecuting them for what they did? Or do you think what they did was insane enough that you should go forward with it regardless? Let me know in the comments down below. And all I know is I love and adore cats. I would probably be researching any way I could find to take this guy down because I just don't understand people who can imagine harming cats like that. Let alone traps, but poison too? In my book, it takes a real monster to do that. Our next story is by OtterSpace08. Lead supervisor gets mad that coworker and I used our paid break to eat. I work in a lab that employs a lot of people nationwide. Kind of irrelevant, but whatever. We get a lot of cases from doctors and hospitals all across the country every day to run tests they order. Because of the sheer amount of cases we get daily, we have a lot of QC that needs to be done by the end of the week. And if it doesn't get done by Saturday night, we have to do a rotation every week to finish it. My actual supervisor said, we have to stay 4 to 6 hours or until everything is done. There's this cynical old woman that works in my department. She's a massive pain in our butt and sends endless amounts of emails a day about fixing things that aren't broken, doing something wrong even though we follow her directions, all the while she's doing none of her own work. She also happens to be the lead of our department, even though she never sees any of us because she's in the back office, not in the actual lab. She works 3rd shift. Today's my rotation. It just so happens to be my birthday weekend. My birthday was Friday. And my coworker who I'm doing the rotation with brought breakfast burritos for the 2 of us. Thankfully, there wasn't a lot of work last week and there was minimal QC to do. After we stayed for an hour and were 80% done with our work, we took a paid 15-minute break. 16 minutes later, we come back into the lab and she starts yelling at us because we went over our time. And she leaves the lab and calls our manager, who basically said it doesn't matter since we're still getting the work done. Old woman comes back and says that we can't leave until the work is done, even though she'll be leaving in about an hour. Okay then. We finish all of our work about 10 minutes after we come back from break, but since we're still on the clock, we're deciding to stay for the entire 6 hours doing mindless work. Cleaning already sanitized stations, deleting emails, dusting keyboards, changing pens, etc., which will cost the company about $300 more because of overtime pay on our paychecks. All because we were 1 minute over. Like I said, this might not be the most exciting as other posts on here, but this is the first time this overworked and underpaid oncology lab worker is doing something like this. All I know is what I've learned from reading all these stories is if you work at a place that gives you breaks, you should make the most of them and you shouldn't feel bad about making the most of them, especially if they're legally required to give you those breaks. It's still hilarious to me to hear all the people that are like, "What, you're telling me not to take the opportunity to get paid for pooping on company time?" I say more power to you. This next story is by Nage 2020, getting the last laugh with an HR manager. My last job was as a warehouse manager with a family business that I'd worked with for well over 10 years. When I started, it was in a small building with a staff of less than 10 people. By the time I left, it had grown into an international pharmaceutical company that employed hundreds. During its tremendous growth, there came a time when someone was employed as an HR manager. They seemed nice and friendly to the people who were above them on the corporate ladder, but rude and dismissive to anyone who they perceived as beneath them. As a fellow manager in a different branch of the organization, I didn't answer directly to them, and as long as I didn't violate the newly implemented HR policy, they had no authority over me. This led to us pretty much just ignoring each other. I watched from the sidelines as they would create unnecessary issues just to exert their authority as HR manager. After a few months, management decided to also put them in charge of occupational health and safety. They instantly became unbearable. Attempts were made to implement policies that interfered with the smooth flow of my department. Safety audits had previously been conducted once a month, with any incidents reported as they occurred. Now I was instructed to conduct an audit every single day and to document any issues complete with photographs. The process became tedious and intrusive and was total overkill. They expected everything to be reported. For example, one day every wooden pallet had to be inspected for splinters. We had 2,000 pallets on site, and purchasing would buy the cheapest pallets they could find. They all had splinters. This led to a breakdown in our work relationship to the point where we communicated mainly through email, as to come into the warehouse, they would have to change from office attire into appropriate safety wear. I will admit that in these communications, there were times when I would be blunt and direct. No time wasted on pleasantries, but I was never rude or discourteous. One day, the operations manager took me aside and informed me that a complaint had been made against me by the HR manager. I was accused of having an unprofessional tone to my emails and that this bordered on bullying in the workplace. The next day, I attend a meeting with the operations manager and the CEO of the company. Because the HR manager made the complaint, they couldn't participate. In the meeting, they put forth the accusations. I denied it and asked for proof, specifically which emails were out of line. They hadn't prepared anything, and we agreed to adjourn to the next day when they had the evidence required. It actually took a week before we could reconvene. They had gone through over 10 years of emails. Everything I had ever sent to anyone using company email. They were unable to present a single email that supported the claims against me. The whole thing was instantly dismissed. I received an apology from the CEO and an assurance that they had no choice but to investigate once the complaint had been made. Cue petty revenge through malicious compliance. There was an alleyway next to the warehouse entrance created by the back wall of the neighboring building, and it was covered in graffiti. One of the tags of the building was a large fist with a middle finger extended, and underneath it was written, "Freak you." I took numerous photos and attached them to the daily audit and sent them to the HR manager, asking them to look at pictures and let me know if they wanted me to paint over the offensive material. I never did hear back from them about it. I mean, man, that just sounds incredibly annoying. Imagine basically being a founder of one of these companies you'd been there for so long, and then it finally gets so big all those faces kind of disappear and some hotshot comes in like, "Alright, this is how you're gonna do it, and you're gonna do it every day instead of monthly. I want every splinter on that wood accounted for." It would take me everything I had to not strap them to a rocket and shoot them into the stratosphere. Secure them down to it using that fancy office tie they're wearing that they're too good to take off because they gotta wear safety gear. Have fun on Pluto! But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. So of all these stories I've read today, which is your favorite and why? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you haven't yet, if you could like and subscribe, that would mean a lot to me. Whatever you do, whether it's liking, subscribing, turning notifications on, all of it helps grow this channel, and I appreciate the heck out of it. So until next time, I'll see you all tomorrow with some more stories.